Well, hello again everybody, and today on the bench we've got a Ferguson 378 tabletop radio. The release date for the Ferguson 378 was 1936, and at that time the tabletop model cost £17. Now, just to get that into perspective, the average weekly wage was about £1.11 back in 1936, and allowing for inflation, that radio would actually cost somewhere near £1,173 today. Well, I picked up this radio recently at a radio sale, and I didn't pay anywhere near that amount of money for it. In fact, I paid just £30 for it, which I actually think was a little bit of a bargain. As is often the case, I actually bought this radio untested, so I've got no idea if it actually works or not. But one thing that I did check is I did actually make sure that it had all the valves in before I started, because some of these old valves can be quite expensive, and in fact really quite hard to get hold of today. And as you can probably see, these sets have 7 valves plus a rectifier, and one of the other interesting things about these sets is they've actually got a push-pull output stage, and as you can see, the speaker in this set is absolutely huge, so I'm sure that this radio probably sounds fantastic when it's up and running. Now, not only is this radio one of the biggest I've had on the bench, it's actually one of the heaviest. It is, it's definitely made out of a lot of very solid wood. It weighs an absolute ton. And taking a look at the radio cabinet, I can kind of see that the grill cloth here isn't great. I kind of wonder if that's the original baffle board. Certainly the cloth's a little bit soggy. And generally the woodwork isn't in too bad a condition. It's certainly not an original finish. I can see that this has been re-varnished, probably with just a brushing varnish, so the finish isn't particularly good. And one problem this radio does have, and probably why it was so relatively cheap, is that the veneer on one side of it is actually in pretty poor condition. So hopefully you can see that yeah, the veneer is pretty damaged here. However, having pointed out that this veneer is damaged, I don't think it detracts too much from the set, because it is on the side of the set and it's pretty low down. So when the radio is actually on a table in use, you don't really see it. Maybe we could do a repair on that. I'm not exactly sure. Woodwork isn't my strong point, but it would be quite nice to try to patch up this veneer if it was possible. One of the features of this radio that really attracted me is this beautiful frequency tuning control with its brass bezel surround, and actually the glass on here, it's not a flat piece of glass, it's actually domed like a goldfish bowl, and it's got this wonderful pointer inside which, oh well, it just moves and feels absolutely fantastic. Having said that though, it's actually got, I think, what is a fast control and a slow motion drive, and for whatever reason it doesn't feel as though the slow motion is working properly. Quite often they have some kind of drive wheel that pushes against kind of like a ring gear or a piece of metal which is kind of a half moon shape, and usually the rollers on this type of tuning arrangement, they usually degrade or come apart, and that's what happens. The slow motion drive doesn't work, so I don't know whether that's something we can fix or not, but certainly something we can take a look at. As I said earlier, this radio was actually manufactured by the Ferguson wireless company, and Ferguson is actually one of the oldest wireless companies in existence. Now, they were originally pre-war an American-Canadian company, and they actually specialised into selling radios into the UK that were kind of an American flavour, and I think this, as you would probably agree, it looks like what I would call an American radio. This is the sort of thing that wouldn't look out of place in Carlson's lab, would it? Now, because I did purchase this radio at a sale, I don't really actually know much about it. I certainly haven't tried to plug it in yet, because I do think it's important before you plug a radio in for the first time, you actually give it a look over. Certainly this is quite an expensive radio, or it would have been back in the day, and it's got a fair lineup of valves in there, and the valves are also getting expensive, so before I put power on it for the first time, I think I would just like to give it a quick check over. So that means that we've actually got to remove the radio from its chassis, because we've just got no idea at what kind of condition it may be in. Now, actually none of these knobs are putting up much of a fight, so it feels as though a lot of these controls have probably been removed at some point in the not too distant past. Okay, I'm just looking at that. It looks as though the cabinet it's actually skewed to one side. These controls are. rubbing on the edge of each of the holes. Everything's shifted over to the left for me. So yeah, maybe it's the chassis isn't sat particularly level inside the case. So certainly this radio does actually show signs of being worked on the past. So we've got kind of like a rubber flex on it, which I don't think would have been original, but it has got this quite interesting Crabtree style plug, and the Crabtree plug has got this enormous kind of strain relief bush on it, a big rubber, almost like a rubber cone stuck on the end of it. I've never seen a plug with a strain relief on it like that. That's really quite strange, isn't it? Also on the back of the radio we've got this plug-in connector. So we've got a lead here, and this lead actually goes up to the loudspeaker via the output transformer, which is actually, I think, grafted onto the back of the speaker. Now I don't think this cable, again, wouldn't be the original cable. This has been replaced at some point in the past, but I'm guessing this isn't a particularly modern replacement because it has got the black and the red coloured insulation on the wiring, so you know that's pre-70s. So at least this cable, well, I suppose we don't know when the cable was actually put on, but certainly the piece of cable itself is an old piece of cable, and it does look as though these wires are a little bit frayed. So here's the audio output transformer with our cable connecting to it, and well, the wires are actually a bit of a mess. I mean, they have been soldered on, but they haven't been soldered on particularly well, and the insulation is melted back. And I can also see that the terminals on the back of the output transformer here, they're all twisted and bent over, and the voice coil connections to the speaker don't look particularly good. But taking a look at this loudspeaker, I don't actually think it's the original speaker, because according to the circuit diagrams for this radio, it should have used an energized speaker. Now, for those of you that haven't seen an energized speaker, well, back in the day, back in the 1930s, it was actually quite difficult to make magnets, and especially to make powerful magnets. So rather than having to go to the expense and difficulty of making a permanent magnet, what they actually used to do is they used to make an electromagnet. So where you see we've got this permanent magnet, there actually would have been an electromagnet installed here, and what they usually do is they take some of the HT from the radio. Well, they actually take the HT from the rectifier and they actually pass it through this electromagnet, and that provides the you know, the magnetic force to operate the speaker. But not only do they actually use it to magnetize the speaker, they actually use this bobbing of wire as an inductor. So they actually use it to actually smooth the DC, the HT supply. But that hasn't been done here, so that makes me think that this is not an original speaker, and at some point in the past it's probably been changed out. And taking a much closer look at the speaker, I can actually see that it's actually held into the cabinet using very modern plated nuts here and washers. So these are bright, these look as though they're brand new. So I think that somebody has been in this radio really very recently and they've done some work on it. The tuning scale on this radio is illuminated with dial lamps, and depending on which of the bands is selected, you'll find that one half or the other half of the tuning scale is illuminated. But you can see that this wiring, again, this is the original cloth covered wiring, but I can see that a lot of the cloth covering, it's in pretty poor condition and it's frayed, and some of the wires look as though they could be shorting out. So again, I think we need to do a little bit of maintenance on that. I can also see that we've got a Hunt's electrolytic capacitor here. Again, this is a non-original capacitor, and it's actually, I think, got more segments in than the actual circuit diagram would show. So I think this has been, again, probably replaced, I'm guessing sometimes in the 60s or the 70s, but yeah, I don't think it's original. Looking at the chassis, there's a little bit of rust on it, but it's not too bad, and I don't think that I'm going to bother to actually strip this radio down and do anything like repaint the chassis. I think it's kind of good enough for me, to be honest. Peering more closely into the depths of the set, you can see that some of the valves here have got these shielding cans on them, and these are what they called goat cans. And again, this kind of betrays its American heritage, that these were very common on American radios, in that it's actually a split shield. If you actually pull the top off, the shield will split in half. So these are called goat shields, and I'm not sure they were ever used on what I would call domestic radios in the UK. Certainly there's something they're much more likely to see on an American radio. Now I'm assuming if we tip this radio over, we're actually going to find some screws which are holding the chassis here into the wooden enclosure. So let's take a look at that. God, that is such a heavy radio. Again, we're pulling out some brand new screws here, so it looks as though, again, somebody's actually been in this radio pretty recently, so we could find that this radio really doesn't need anything doing to it. I'm not exactly sure the best way to try to actually take the screws from out of this radio, because there's so much weight in the chassis. I don't want it to slide in the enclosure and end up damaging itself because it's heavy. Maybe I can just... I think I might actually have to sit under the bench. Okay, so I've taken 4 screws out, so I think maybe the chassis will come out now. Oh. So now we've taken the chassis out of the radio, we can have a much better look. So I can see that we've got some, you know, aluminium IF coils and things of that nature. They're a little bit oxidised, but they're not too bad. The actual chassis itself has got what I would call just a light coating of surface rust on it. So yeah, that's a little bit rusty. Maybe we could rub that down and give it all a spray with some cold galv spray, something like that. But we can also see these valve shields that I mentioned earlier. So again, these are the goat style shields. And we can also see that the grid connections to 2 of these valves here, they've got some wire going to them, and it looks as though this wire is, well, you can see it's actually badly frayed. There's quite a lot of bare insulation showing through on here, so yeah, we probably want to put some new pieces of wire on there. And just as we spotted earlier, we can see that these dial lamps here, they're yeah, the wiring has just it's just crumbled away. They've got insulation which is all come away, and they're pretty much shorting out. Let me just turn the radio around so you can see the front of it, and it looks as though this was designed to be kind of rear illuminated by the dial lamps here. Again, I can see that, yeah, they're all a little bit loosey-goosey, a bit how you doing. And as we said earlier, the slow motion drive, I can see the slow motion drive on here. For some reason that seems to be defective as well. I don't think there's anything we can do to improve that or not. Right, I guess what we really want to look at though is we want to actually see underneath the chassis, don't we? Because that's where all the good stuff is going to be, the good stuff or the bad stuff. So let's turn the chassis over if we can without damaging anything, and have a look underneath. So having turned the chassis over, we can actually see that somebody's actually done quite a lot of work on this radio already. And yeah, the work is a little bit scruffy here and there, but so we can see that somebody's gone ahead and they've actually replaced most of what would have been the old waxy capacitors, and they've gone ahead and replaced them with what I think you would call them the Mullard mustard pot. So yeah, they're audio grade, audiophile capacitors now, aren't they? Everybody wants these mustard pots. I can also see a couple of quite big wire wound resistors here, and we've got a capacitor which is kind of blowing in the wind a little bit. How you doing? And yeah, what they're trying to do there is, the original speaker, as we said, it was an energized loudspeaker, and they actually used the inductor in the speaker winding to do some smoothing of the AC. They use it as a choke. So what they've actually done is they've replaced that those field windings with a couple of resistors here, which is, it's to drop the voltage slightly, because you would get a voltage drop across the speaker winding. But the other thing that they're employing here, they're using what they call CR smoothing, capacitor resistor smoothing. So again, what they're actually forming between these two resistors and this capacitor, they're actually forming what you would call a low pass filter. So they're just trying to do a bit of HT smoothing. Just visually inspecting the band selection switches here, I can see that the switches themselves look pretty grubby and dirty, so I think they could actually do with some switch cleaner on them. So again, while we've got this radio out of its chassis, we will actually go ahead and we'll give them a clean. I can also see some wires which have been added here, and I think the person who did this, you don't like to call people out who did work before you, but maybe they maybe they were using a big soldering iron, or maybe their eyes weren't as good as they could have been, because it does appear that most of the modern wiring that's been put in, wherever they seem to have put a modern wire in, they've actually they burnt the insulation around it and melted it with the tip of the soldering iron. So yeah, I think we could improve some of the wiring. I can see the bottom of our Hunts capacitor here, so I think we will actually go ahead and we will change that Hunts out. We'll probably try to put some modern capacitors. We'll put a tag strip in underneath, probably leave the Hunts capacitor there just for the visualization. I can also see that all the variable resistors here on the front panel controls, they've all been changed out with much more modern components. I can just see one evil looking waxy capacitor down here, which we'll just find out what that is. It looks a little bit difficult to get at, that's why I suspect it's probably been left in. But yeah, just one paper capacitor there. So I think if we can get at that and change it out, we will do. Well, I have just spotted one problem here. We can see that the mains flex that I said I was going to replace anyway with this rubber cable, for some reason the neutral connector, which actually goes to a Wanda plug, hopefully you can see that the copper is totally exposed. I can't really see what's happened there, but it looks as though it's been rubbed away. I can't really see how this lead could have had enough movement on it to remove the insulation. But yeah, you can see the bare copper. It's totally exposed. I think these Wanda plugs could be just potentially a little bit dangerous, and actually they're pretty loose as well. What I might actually do is, I think I might disconnect the Wanda plug and blank that off, and maybe we'll just permanently wire the neutral connector to one of these switch positions. I've just noticed another interesting feature of this radio, which is the way in which they've actually retained the mains cord here to stop it pulling out of the chassis, and yes, that certainly is something. I know not what. It looks a lot like what they use to tidy up the cable on the back of a vacuum cleaner when you finish using it, but I wouldn't recognise that as being a proper pucker cable restraint. Now, of course, back in the day, a lot of the cables just used to be retained in old wireless sets by they just used to tie a knot in them, and yeah, that's probably not a good idea either. But yeah, this isn't really quite right. Well, now I've actually pulled our mains cord out of the way, I can actually see the transformer a little bit better, and it looks like, I'm trying to tell if that wiring is just old or dirty, or if it's looking a little bit charred. It could even be looking just a little bit charred. Not exactly sure. I think the best thing we can do with that is, yeah, let's just ignore it for now. Yeah, look somewhere else. And of course, an episode of All the Gear No Idea wouldn't be complete without a quick game of plug roulette, would it? So who's guessing what size fuse is in this? I think that this radio's clearly been done by somebody who's interested in vintage radio, so I think they will have fused it properly. So I think that this plug won't have a 13 amp fuse in it. I'm going to go for a 3 amp fuse. Does anybody want to take a gamble? 3 amp fuse? 3 amp fuse, I've got a winner. So having taken the back off the plug, I have actually just noticed that it's only a 2-core main flex, so this radio chassis isn't earthed. Well, I don't know about you, with a transformer looking just as dubious as this one, I would like to have this radio chassis earthed before I actually power it up. Now, I know that it's a bit of a contentious subject, because radio chassis back in the day, they wouldn't have been earthed back to the mains plug. They actually would have had an earth socket on them, but that earth would have gone to a stake in the ground, probably outside the house. So the idea of the earth socket was to have a clean earth, one that isn't full of electrical noise. And of course, anything coming in on a modern house, and with house wiring and switch mode power supplies and plasma screen TVs, the actual noise, the electrical noise on the wiring is considerable. Certainly it'll be a lot worse than it was back in the day. But I just think, from the point of view of electrical safety, if you have a metal chassis, and especially something that I'm going to be working on like this, I think I have to go ahead and put an earth on it, even though it probably will increase the background hum a little bit on the radio. I also really just can't help wondering about this very, very impressive strain relief we've got on the cord here. That really is, yeah, something very different. Well, because this transformer does actually look just a little bit ropey to me, I think we could actually do worse than actually do an insulation resistance test on it, just to make sure that we haven't got anything shorting to ground on the chassis, because if nothing else, when I plug it in, it's going to make all my lights go out, and my wife's halfway through watching Strictly, so I'll be in trouble if that happens. So let's try and do an insulation resistance test at 250 volts first. Okay, so that's measuring clear, so that's okay. And I like to do it at double the supply voltage, so we'll try again at 500. Again, that's measuring infinity, so that looks good. So let's just test our tester. In fact, before we do that, let's try the neutral wire as well, although it should be the same. Just do that at 500. Okay, it's past that. And just test our tester. Yeah, okay, that's fine. So actually, even though the transformer looks a little bit dubious, no problem. Got good insulation resistance there. Well, as you can see, we've gone ahead and we've got the radio cabinet with its speaker back on the bench. It nearly gave me a hernia to lift it up there, but we survived. We've connected it up, so we've got the speaker connected. Also, gone ahead and got out the old lamp limiter, because of course lamp limiters are very useful for powering up valve radios. I think we've got a 100-watt bulb here, but because this is a big radio, it might need it. We've also got a 200-watt bulb just in case. So I think it's ready to power up. Oh, of course, it is plugged into an external aerial, so hopefully we'll pull some stations in. So, as we always say about now, place your bets. Is it going to work it, or is it not going to work it? I don't know. You tell me. Is it going to work? I think this radio is going to work. That's where my money's going. So let's switch on. Really excited. Come on. Oh, going dim, getting brighter. Come on, come on. When the rectifier starts conducting, the bulbs should start to get brighter again. Okay, the rectifier's conducting. We're waiting for the HT. Anything? Silence. Anything? Anything? Can hear a little bit of a crackle. Maybe something's working. Yeah, I think we're tuning. Looks like we've got a station. Should we take the gamble, give an old girl a bit more power? Let's give it the beans. Really missing our fine tuning control here. So I think this must be the shortwave band that we're on now. Well, we're pulling a few stations in. Let's see what the next band is.
Also bis gleich.
Oh well, I think that must be another shortwave station. Oh yeah, shortwave 1, shortwave 2, so it must have two shortwave bands, so maybe let's try the other one. Oh, back to medium wave. Let's have a go. We'll get it at medium wave stations. Oh, I've got a dirty volume pot here, I think.
A little bit more. He's the one that can carry the ball from up.
Lost possession on the halfway line and leads on another attack now. Yeah, Phillips with a curling ball to the right. Harrison. I bet Scotland experience. Five. Thanks for covering, Lee.
Back for 4 short. 4 towards Harrison.
Okay, so that's our medium wave. So is there one long wave?
Parce qu'il a vécu et qu'il demande à sa copine de le protéger.
An attempted case of a predatory marriage not that long ago, and the registrar involved has agreed to speak to me.
Wow, very, very noisy, scratchy volume pot, but that's Radio 4, I believe.
Appointment. So this is where you interview the couples who want to get married.
Going to have to give that a clean or maybe replace it. Well, hopefully you can see that I've gone ahead and I've started to do a little bit of tidying up around here. By no way complete yet, got a few things still left to change. I actually found quite a number of really dry joints. I repositioned these 2 resistors here, and we had this big 32 microfarad capacitor as part of this CR smoothing, which was replacing the field winding of our loudspeaker. But I've gone ahead and I've removed that because it's quite an old capacitor and it's got a fair voltage across it, and I've replaced that with a new 450 volt rated capacitor at 32 microfarads. So previously I did just loosely tag on this red wire, which is the HT smoothed supply. So that's feeding one end of the resistor, which feeds our suppression grid. Can we get that off? Yeah. See, a lot of these resistors aren't kind of wrapped round at all. They're just barely touching. Quite crudely done, in fact. Oh god, and again it's just really badly soldered on down here. Yeah, and I think we'll have to try and clean up these connections here. Everything's just badly twisted together. Can't see the wood for the trees as usual. It's just J-hooked wires on top of J-hooked wires. I'm not opposed to doing a little bit of J-hooking, but this has gone a little bit too far. Anyway, I just need to spend a bit of time tidying this up. I'll bring you back when I've done. So as you can see, I've gone ahead and I've replaced our screen grid resistor here and also the decoupling capacitor, and I've also put a nicer orange wire that goes between a couple of these valves here, which again is just the screen grid. So that all looks a little bit tidier. I've also gone around here and there was again quite a lot of bad joints on it, which we've just tidied up. But because I have done a little bit of work on the circuit, I always like to keep checking my work, so I think it's time we just put some power on it and just check it all still works.
You don't even remember what your own name is. There is no way you would know what.
One of the examples that they had for was.
Wow, this is a fantastic sounding radio. I'm in love with this Ferguson set. Why didn't I discover these Fergusons earlier? I would have collected more of these.
The time of reminiscence concerning passing over to the other side. Chapter 12. My breath, my sunshine, my all in all, the great Creator became my Savior, and all God's fullness dwelleth